My name is Steve Maull. I'm with Maull Biomedical Training. Here about plus hour introduction to contrast injectors. Now, real quick, real short introduction about me. I'm from Ohio, born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then went to college, Miami University, graduated. After I graduated, I joined the Air Force, and that's how I got into Ohio. I was Air Force BMET for 11 years. First 7 years, I was BMET. Last 4 years, I was BMET instructor and curriculum developer at the, started off as the Air Force BMET school, and then in 1999, Army Navy joined us, became DoD BMET school. So that's how I got into training.
You guys joined the Army Navy.
What's that?
You guys joined the Army Navy.
No, they came to us. They thought
I was an Army pilot.
the military thought, where's the best place to have this? Denver, Colorado, or Wichita Falls, Texas? Let's do everything in Wichita Falls, Texas. But yeah. So no, when I got out, I got out in 2001. I wanted to stay in training, and so my plan wasn't to go back to Ohio. I was just kind of worked out. I went back to Ohio and joined a company called Tech, taught X-ray, put the lab in the back of them for several years. Then in 2008, I started this company because nobody was teaching contrast injectors at all. So decided to do good. All right. So now, how the training normally works with us? Our training is in 3 parts. There's introduction to contrast injectors, which is what we're doing today. We have, and then there's operation training, and then there's maintenance training. The first 2 parts of those are on our website. Anybody can go to our website and take those courses. They're each about, the introduction course is about a half hour long if you're doing it the online version. The operation trainings are 20 to 30 minutes long, depending on the model. So just anybody's free to do it. If you're interested in more information about contrast injectors and specifically how specific models work, go to our website and stuff like that. All right. Now, getting to this though. So whatever we have in front of you, most of you, I apologize. I think a couple of you don't have manuals. I thought I brought up manuals. Normally it's not manuals, but they were probably normal. You guys are ready? All right. So what you have in front of you, manuals that you can follow along with in the lecture today. Then a folder, and a folder just has a bunch of propaganda in it, has a business card, pamphlet, information about our course syllabus, course outline, PM kits, toolkits, and so forth. All right. If you have any questions, you can ask me afterwards, or a vendor in the exhibit hall this evening, so you can ask me then. All right. Now, first things first, before we get rolling, just to give make sure everybody's on the level playing field here, because I think some of you are probably biomeds, some of you are probably imaging. A real short introduction to X-ray imaging and how X-rays are produced, how they not how X-rays are produced, how the X-ray images are produced. All right. So let's say we have our X-ray table right here. Logistically, I apologize. This is not ideal, but my injector's over here, so I'm going to be walking in front of the screen a lot. So we have an X-ray table here. The patient is on the table. The X-ray tube is above the table, firing radiation into the patient. Then underneath the table or inside the table is, it used to be film, now it's some kind of CR or DR. Digitally captures the X-rays. Okay. Now, when X-rays go into the patient, all right, all that's, we'll say for our purposes, we'll say all the X-rays that come out of the X-ray tube go into the patient. All right. Now, some of those X-rays that go into the patient pass through the patient and strike that detector underneath the table. Some of the radiation goes into the patient, gets absorbed by the patient. Right? Now we need both things to happen. We cannot have all the radiation that goes into the patient get absorbed by the patient. Then no radiation hits the plate, and none of the image gets started. Right? Because X-rays make the image start. If all the radiation we fire to the patient went completely through the patient, struck that plate, the entire plate would be black, completely overexposed. So we need some penetration and we need some absorption. So that X-ray beam, which is a different course, that X-ray beam has to be just the right intensity, KVP and MA to get the proper amount of penetration, not too much, not too little. Right? Now, like I said before, X-rays make the image dark. Wherever X-rays strike that plate, that's where the part of the image that turns dark. Now, the odds that an X-ray photon will be absorbed by the patient's body is determined by the thickness and the density of the body part that X-ray photon interacts with. So if we fire an X-ray photon into soft tissue, there's a much greater chance that X-ray photon will pass right through the soft tissue, hit the plate, make that area dark. All right. If an X-ray photon is striking the patient's thicker, denser body parts, like bone, all right, that will absorb that X-ray photon. So the parts of that plate that are shielded by bone material, thicker, denser parts of the patient, are shielded from the X-ray. So those parts of the plate don't get as much radiation, so they stay lighter on the X-ray image. So that's how your typical X-ray image is produced. All right. Now, like I said before, the odds that an X-ray photon will penetrate through a patient's body part is dependent on the thickness and the density of the body part that X-ray photons interact with. Now, blood vessels are not thick nor dense compared to other parts in the body. Right? So that's why rarely X-rays don't show blood vessels. Blood vessels are thin, they're not very dense. X-ray photons have no trouble passing through a vein or an artery, completely blasting out of the image. And 99 times out of 100, we don't care. We being the doctors. We don't care. We're looking for a broken bone. But sometimes we do care. Sometimes I do need to see that artery or that vein, right? So what we have to do is we have to put something in that artery or vein during the X-ray so that it now absorbs the X-rays and shows up as either a lighter, as a lighter area on the image. Everybody follow that logic? All right. That is in a nutshell angiography. All right. Now this is a poor choice on my part because what I've been describing is a radiographic image, and my example is a fluoroscopic image, which is the exact opposite of what's white start and start white, but it's the same thing. Angiography is a procedure where we're going to inject a certain kind of fluid into the patient's blood system during the imaging procedure so that the blood vessels now show up as better images or any image at all on the X-ray image. All right, and you can see, I mean, it is the stuff they use is highly effective. Some of these blood vessels are hair thin, yet they still are able to absorb radiation, show up on the image. All right, that's it. You learned all about concepts. I guess. All right. Yes. I don't. No, sorry. If you want one after the show, let me know. If you want one afterwards, then let me know. Oh, we had something. Yeah. All right. Now, when it comes to angiographic techniques, I just described what an angiograph or angiographic procedure is. There's 3 different kinds of angiographic images produced. They're produced by catheter angiography, which is your specials, cath lab, things like that. Then there's also CT angio and MRI angio. Discuss this. It's a small difference between each of them. Now, each of the systems uses an injector to inject some kind of fluid, contrast fluid into the patient during the image to make the images at all possible to see. The images produced through these methods are called angiographs. Now, for CT and MRI injectors, that is done through an IV needle. All right. For angiographic procedures, it's done with a catheter. IV needle is typically put in the back of the hand or the arm. They can do it in other places, but those are the most common places where they'll put the IV needle in to inject the contrast fluid into it. One who's not. One of 3 people is not blocked. So CT and MRI, they use IV needles. They never use catheters. Your cath labs, your special procedures, and things like that we're using the angiographic X-ray systems with, those use catheters. Typically, the catheter will be inserted in the femoral artery or femoral vein, depending on which side of the body, side of the heart, things like that. The contrast is just later eliminated through the body's normal waste disposal through the kidneys and the liver, and then depending on how much you've been injected with, it can be anywhere from 12 to 24, 36 hours to hours. Now, major manufacturers. There are 3 manufacturers in the United States, and there is an absolute pecking order amongst the 3. By far, the biggest, Medrad and Bayer. They've been Bayer forever. They got bought out by, or they've been Medrad forever. They got bought out by Bayer a couple of years ago. They still go by Medrad for the most part. They literally have 80+% of the market, maybe worldwide, definitely here in the United States. They are by far the biggest manufacturer of contrast injectors. Number two, all by themselves, I actually need to update this. Legal Floorstone became Maull, became Fidian, became Tyco, now they're Gervais. They are all by themselves in second place in the market here in the United States. Distant second, but they are in second. But then there's the AS company down here, Braco ECM. These two models right here, the ACES CBI and Power CT, they've been around a while. They've had the systems out for a while, but last couple of years, they're really making a charge to the market. Getting more and more requests for training on those injectors.
Why?
I really don't know what they've done. I really don't know what they've done in the last couple of years. It has suddenly made them much more prominent. But 2 years, and like I said, the ACES CBI and the Power CT, they've been around for 10 years. But in the last 2 years, my request for training on those two models has gone up tenfold.
I think it's their contract.
Is that how they're doing it?
We had a bunch of that and stuff that have installed, pretty much get installed injectors.
That's a good deal. And they're nice. I mean, Bayer Evrad probably makes the nicest contrast injector with most bells and features and stuff. But I mean, the ACES CBI, well, actually, I don't like the ACES CBI, but that's just from a teaching maintenance standpoint. It works okay. So the operator love. And the Power CT, super simple, very easy to deal with. Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. All right. As we talked before, the intravenous contrast highlights the blood vessels and enhances the structure of the organs. Once it's injected in the bloodstream, it circulates throughout the body and recovers. There we go.
Oh.
All right. Yeah, just click it for me, thanks. Yeah, you just have to touch that baby. Thank you. All right, now, like I said, there's three kinds of imaging systems that use contrast: angio, CT, and MRI. Now, angio and CT, while they're dramatically different pieces of imaging equipment, they're both X-ray equipment. All right, both use X-rays to use the images. So the contrast fluid that angio and CT systems use is iodine. Okay, the main ingredient in contrast for any X-ray system, angio and CT, is iodine. I don't know exactly what it is about iodine that makes it block X-rays, but it does. It is very, very effective at absorbing radiation, not allowing you to let through. It has something to do with the atomic structure and how many electrons it has in a valence shell, but I don't go that deep into it. Just iodine blocks X-rays, hit the I believe button. So next. Now for MRI, any MRI experts in here? Anybody work on MRI? One, all right, so I can't lie. Now MRI, I got a bunch of cool false stories about MRI. MRI does not use radiation to produce the images. It uses electronic pulses and a magnetic field to produce the images. So iodine has absolutely no effect on the image producing capabilities of electronic pulses. So they don't use iodine, but they do use something called gadolinium. Now, gadolinium, you have to have a real base knowledge of how the MRI image is produced, and how that is basically they're firing pulses, RF pulses into the patient. Thousands and thousands of pulses per second. I don't know the exact number, but it's more than a couple, all right? Now, there's also a coil. It's not just a magnetic field that the patient is inserted in that giant gantry. There's a coil literally around the patient's knee, around the patient's head, something like that, that is capturing the echoes of these RF pulses. Because when we're applying an RF pulse to the patient, energy is being built up in the patient. I'll explain that in a second. When the RF pulse is stopped, the energy built up in the patient gets sent back as an echo. And these coils basically collect these echoes over the next 20, 30 minutes, right? We're applying an RF pulse, take the pulse away, it echoes it back, right? Those pulses and that coil are what eventually make our MRI imaging, right? Now, how those pulses get created, right? Purpose of the magnetic field, when the patient gets placed into the magnetic or in the MRI chamber. Your body's 70% water, roughly, right? Water is H2O. What this magnetic field is doing is it's affecting the hydrogen atoms in your body. Now, a hydrogen atom, remember your high school science, has one electron in its shell. It's orbiting the nucleus of the hydrogen atom, right? When this patient is put in this incredibly intense magnetic field, that electron stops orbiting and it's polarized. It's either polarized to the North Pole or it's polarized to the South Pole, but it's no longer spinning, it's polarized, all right? Now, when they apply that RF pulse, that millisecond of an RF pulse, let's say this is the nucleus and this is my electron up here, my hydrogen electron. That electron, while that RF pulse is being applied, it recesses that electron off its axis, that north-south, pulls it off, like pulling a bowstring on air, right? Pulls it off. Then, when that RF pulse is removed, that electron presets back, and it sends out an RF pulse. That's what those coils are. All right? Now, we're going to do that literally billions and billions of times per minute over the next 20 minutes. All right? That's how these images are produced. And what the gadolinium does is, the gadolinium dampens the magnetic field's effect on that particular body part, on the hydrogen atoms in that particular body part. Now, that electron, when that RF pulse is being applied, instead of pulling back this far, it only pulls back a little bit. This far gives me a big RF pulse back. The RF pulse is moving a little recession off the axis, and a precession is a little pulse. Little pulses are darker, big pulses are lighter. So what gadolinium does is it basically dampens the effect of those RF pulses on the bloodstream, the hydrogen atoms in that particular area during the imaging process. We got it? Wait, believe me? No, I've not this particular thing, but I mean I've been teaching years and years and years, and you have to have, a lot of times you have to have multiple ways to explain something because not everybody understands things the same way. And there have been a couple of times over my career I've exhausted all my ways of explaining this particular thing or whatever, and then eventually I just, you just get to a point with the student like, look, you may not understand it, but you just have to believe it. You just have to believe it. I'm not smart to explain it any other way than the two or three ways I will explain it. So you just have to believe it. All right, next please, thank you. All right, now the next, first thing I'm going to talk about here, we're getting actually on the equipment, is something called pressure limiting. The pressure limiting is a simple concept. Once I get through the whole thing, you will, oh, I get that. But it is kind of involved, it's kind of important. It's an aspect that gets checked on, I used to say on every contrast injector, but there is a model out there that they don't bother checking pressure limit on it, so I thought that was very strange, but they do. Now, before I get to specifically pressure limit, right? There's, and again, I apologize, I know everybody probably can't see this, but so this is the display where the operator's going to enter the parameters for that injection over there. So that is connected to the patient. That's a CT, this is a skeleton, the CT injector. So that is going to be connected to the patient. Now, when the operator wants to do an injection on the patient, there's three things the operator has to select. There's a bunch of things they can select, but there's three things that have to be selected, right? Everything else can have zero, but these have to have something. There's flow rate, there's volume, there's pressure. Right? Now, flow rate, again, I'm not talking down, just I don't know what everybody's experiences are. I assume everybody has some knowledge of piston pumps syndrome, because that's all this is. It's a very fancy piston pump. Now, the flow rate is the speed of the injection. How fast are we going to fire this fluid into the patient, and it's measured in milliliters per second, right? And volume is the total quantity of fluid, contrast we're going to fire into this patient, right? Then the pressure limit. This is what gets misunderstood by typically the operators. The pressure limit is the maximum pressure we're going to allow in this syringe during the actual injection, right? We're going to say 300 psi. During this injection, do not exceed 300 psi during the injection. You laugh.
Seriously, uses that much?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's low. The annual injection goes to 1,000. That's in the syringe, not in the patient. That's something I was going to bring up. Not in the patient. That's why, and that actually is a problem with the operators, because like you all just assumed when I said that, the operators look through the operator's manual and they're not looking through the operator, they're programming, 250, 300 psi. They've been told to do that. You're using this procedure, this is the pressure, and they're thinking 300 psi. And they're thinking in the patient, no, it's not in the patient. Anyway, we'll get to that. So this is the three things. flow rate, volume, pressure, right? Now, the factor that affects your pressure limit the most, by far, is the flow rate. Faster the injection, greater the pressure we're going to build up inside that syringe. All right. This isn't the best. All right. Let's say my fluid, or let's say I'm connected here and I do a flow rate, and I'm forcing all this fluid right here out this little tiny hole at the top, with an even thinner tube coming out of it through an even thinner IV needle inside the patient. All right. So this is slow. We are driving my piston forward at this rate. So this is slow. All right, so let's say we are driving the piston forward, and we're trying to shove all this fluid out of here, out of this little tiny hole, the very small French catheter. All right. At this speed right here, we have some pressure built up in the syringe. Right. And if we go faster, there will be even greater pressure inside the syringe. Right? The faster I push it out, the faster I try to shove all this fluid out of this little hole, more pressure we're going to feel inside the syringe. Everybody follow that? All right. Now, so what the system is set up to do is prevent destruction to the syringe if we somehow exceed the pressure that this syringe is particularly limited to. All right. Now, this particular contrast goes up to 325. Most CT injectors go up to 300 psi. The stuff goes to 25. I don't really know why. But that is by far the most common. When we're talking about CT and MRI, that's the most common pressure limit dealing with. All right. Now, if you remember, I'm talking about that. Now, there's the three things that I talk about: flow rate, volume, pressure limit. The flow rate and volume are determined by the size of the patient and the procedure that we're actually going to do. Right? When the patient comes in, they're going to do a PHS, something like that. They know, all right, that's this volume, that's this flow rate, all right? But what determines the pressure? What determines how much pressure they should select for this particular patient, right? Let me ask you this. It was rhetorical. There's three components from the injector to the patient. There's my syringe, there's my connector tubing, then there's my IV needle or my catheter, talking into it. Now, of those three components, syringe, tubing, catheter inside the patient, which would we least want to explode? The catheter. Yes, because catheters are expensive, they're very difficult to get out of a patient once they've exploded. All right, so the catheter, all right? So what determines what pressure limit goes, they put on the machine, or they enter into the protocol, whatever the catheter, whatever pressure limit that catheter or that IV needle is rated at. Now, with the other thing I said about, I don't know why they would pick, 325 or something. IV needles are rated at 400 plus PSI. These only go up to 300. I get the question because they have the ability to select 200 PSI, 100 PSI. To this day, I've been teaching this for 13 years, 14 years. To this day, I have no idea why the operators would not pick anything less than 300 PSI. Right? Because that can cause a problem. I'll talk about that in a second. So the pressure limit, like I said, is primarily determined by the flow rate. So what happens? Let's say we're doing an injection and my contrast injector, it does it. It's its pressure limit for whatever reason, right? Which is not supposed to happen, but sometimes things go wrong, right? One thing they don't want to happen is they don't want to stop the injection, if at all possible, right? Now, pressure limit is not an occlusion. Pressure limit, if there's an occlusion, a tube is pinched closed, an IV needle, some kind of clog or something like that, a catheter, an occlusion is treated differently. If there's an occlusion during the injector stops, all right? You can tell the difference between an occlusion and a pressure, all right? So right now we're just going to talk about pressure, meaning we're injecting fluid, but the pressure inside the syringe is too high. It's higher than we want. So what does the machine do? But just so it doesn't stop. How come we don't want to stop the injection? Right? Pressure is going too high. Why don't we just stop? Do I know?
What's the time?
What else are we firing into the patient at this particular rate?
X-rays, you don't want to radiate
X-rays, right? So if we stop the injection, we got to start over again. So all the radiation we just fired to the patient was for nothing, right? So we don't stop. What do we do to keep the pressure from keep climbing up?
Slow it down.
Slow the injection down, right? Now, they might have to do the injection again anyway. I mean, if we're asking you an injection of 8 milliliters per second and it had to go down to 2 milliliters per second, yeah, something's wrong. That's probably not going to be enough fluid to give us the image we need. But, you know, if it goes from 8 milliliters to 7.7 milliliters per second, yeah, pressure's limited, but we're still good. So that's why they don't want to stop the injection, because then it's a added patient dose that didn't necessarily need to occur. All right, and that's pretty much, that's not universally true that not stopping, but most models do follow that procedure. If we hit a pressure limit, we'll just slow the injection down to the maximum flow we can do at the selected maximum pressure. All right, any questions? That's pretty much it. Next, you're actually going to hit next a couple times here. Cover a lot. Reducing the flow rate. Yeah. What's that?
Finally got the sample job.
Yeah, next. Things that affect pressure limit, selected flow rate. Oh, the viscosity of the fluid, I didn't get to bring up that one. The contrast these syringes. You notice there's 2 syringes here. One's for contrast, one's for saline. Most of your CT injectors these days are going to have 2 syringes, one for contrast, one for saline. If your hospital utilizes, 16 slice or better CT system, which I can't imagine any of them don't now, and they use post-processing to create a lot of the images, they need, it's not just a CT injection, it's a CTA injection, CT angiography. To get the angiography part, to fully maximize it, they need the saline. All right, for several different things, which we won't go into with this listing. All right, so yeah, CT syringe and angiographic syringe. The saline is just salt water, right? It's as thin as salt water. But contrast, there is a slight syrupy texture to it. Very slight syrupy texture to it. It's not quite as thin as water. And what we're doing is, again, we are firing this fluid through a needle, literally the size of a vaccine needle, an IV needle. So any little bit we can do to lower this fluid, make this fluid a little thinner, we're going to do it. And how to do that? What happens to syrup when you warm it up? It tastes better and it's running. Yep. So closing. All right. So the contrast, they'll do it for the saline for a reason I'll talk about here in a second. They don't need to keep the saline warm to make it run, to make it flow better. But contrast, it's not like maple syrup, but there's a slight syrupy texture to it. So they keep the contrast bottle in a warmer, keep it at about 37 degrees Celsius, about body temperature. And then they'll fill the syringe up, and then there's a syringe warmer that attaches to the actual syringe. Now the syringe warmer, often called a syringe heater, it's not good enough you can't take room temperature contrast, it'll warm it up to 37 degrees Celsius, but it will keep warm contrast warm longer. And again, the whole purpose of that is to help the flow through the catheter and the tubing when it comes showtime. Now, the only reason we will keep the contrast, the saline warm as well, sometimes they don't, but some places do, is some systems, not all these systems, but some of these systems, they can actually inject simultaneously. the Stella actually has a CT package, it's called a cardio package or cardio package, where you can shoot 50% contrast, 50% saline simultaneously, 70, 30 or something like that. So there's no point in warming my contrast up 37 degrees Celsius because this is cool. I'm going to mix them. So sometimes they do actually have warmers for the saline as well. I mean, it's the same exact one. Sometimes they bother keeping the same one. Sometimes they do. All right. And the other thing, length of diameter of the catheter tubing. Obviously, the longer the connector tubing, this is your connector tubing. It goes from the syringes, and then this connects to the IV needle in the end. The longer this is, the more pressure that will build up during the injection. The thinner this is, the longer it builds up, or the higher pressure it builds up during the injection. But to be honest, these really come, there's a standard width, and there's like 2, maybe 3 standard lengths. And the difference between the shortest one and the longest one is like 12 inches. So the last two, the length and diameter of the connector tubing, that's never the issue. Don't think, oh, we're personally change connector tubes. No, that's not it. All right, next. Now, this is pretty much universally true. There's one example that is not following this, but contrast injectors, I talk about this in class all the time. Contrast injectors, they're like defibrillators and infusion pumps in the sense that you've seen one, basically seen them all. You know how they all work 95% the same, right? All of them, with one exception, all of them, there's a display where the operator inputs the protocols they want to shoot. There's a power supply, and there's the injector. No more, no less. Okay, next. Now, I talked a little bit about these before. The syringe and the syringe heater, which I just spoke about. Some of the contrast injectors just use one syringe. Angio injectors, for instance, those just use one syringe. There's no point using a second syringe for saline angiographic procedures. It's just the nature of the beast. It's how it's used. They don't use saline for angiographic or for radiographic angiographic procedures. CT, these days, almost all CT injectors do, not all of them, but nearly all of them. You can actually get pretty much any CT injector, you can get a single syringe version of it. This one is called the Stellan D. D stands for dual, so it's the single version is called the Stellan S. It's just a contrast syringe, no single. MRI syringes, on the other hand, all MRI syringes use two syringes, one for contrast, one for single. All right. Yes. Now, this is almost universally true as well. The syringes are model specific. There's a couple of examples, and it's only because like this model replaced this model, but they didn't change the syringe. That's the only time those are examples. But the syringes on that Stellan only fit the Stellan. They don't fit any other model. That's true with pretty much every single model. Every single contrast injector system has a syringe specifically for it. You can't just run it out of the room and just give me a syringe. No, it matters. And they are one-time use only for medical use. One-time use only. They use it once and throw it away. There's an exception to that. The ASIS uses their syringe 5 times. But the way the ASIS CBI works, they don't actually touch anything when they're filling it. It refills itself automatically, so they can use the same syringe all the time before they pitch it. But yeah. Now, what I tell my students though is like, now that you know how to do PMs on these, you need syringes when you go PM. You don't use your syringe once and toss it. First time you go do a syringe, a PM on the Stellan, last department for 2 Stellan syringes. Now those are your PM syringes. You'll keep those. They'll last you dozens and dozens and dozens of PMs. All right. And then last thing, the syringe heater. This is a picture. That's actually my Stellan right here, and that's just the syringe. Syringe heater. This is it. It is not repairable. Anybody have Biomedical? There's a Stellan CT heater. How much?
$1,300 or
$1,300
for a resistor.
And you can't. Yep. No, for a resistor, embedded in a piece of plastic, and you can't fix it. When it goes bad, they go bad every summer. They go bad. You just have to buy one. Can't tear it open and. So that's not like that. It's plugged into the back here. Simple enough. They're digital. They work or they don't. There's no way. All right, really, I already talked about this. There's the 3 things that the operator has to select. You cannot have a blank in each screen: flow rate, volume, and pressure. Like I mentioned earlier, depending on modality, pressure can be set anywhere from 50 psi, that's the lowest setting on some of these injectors, up to some of your angio injectors, the Probus and the Angiomat Aluminum, the Mark V Plus, they can go up to 1200 psi. In some instances, you can type in, they give you 1,200 pounds of pressure in that syringe, and it'll hold. Yeah. Next. Multi-phase and multi-level injection. All right. So, again, I apologize. Normally this is further back and stuff like that, but on my particular model here, all right. So for those of you who can see. There's two syringes over here. These are the graphic representations of your syringes. The green one is your contrast syringe, and blue one is your saline syringe. And then this table right here, that's your protocol table. That's where I enter the protocol. That with this volume, this flow rate, and this pressure, right? So this first, notice there's 4 lines here, right? 4 lines, 4 rows, and there are 3 columns, all right? Now the first column here, that's your flow rate, speed of the injection. The second column is your volume, total quantity of fluid I want to inject. And then the third column is the actual duration of the injection. And that's automatically calculated by the machine. I'm going to do 10 milliliter per second flow rate. I'm going to inject 50 milliliters, that's 5 seconds. The injector automatically calculates it. Don't have to do that yourself. Now, what these are, these 4 rows here, those are called phases. There's one model that calls them levels. For some reason, it's an older model, but universally, these are called phases. Now, what this means is this first phase right here, this first line, which is green, and it's 5 and 20. So green, that means it's contrast. 5, that means I want to flow rate of 5 milliliters per second, and a total of 20 milliliters. All right, that's the first phase. Each phase is a separate injection. All right. Then the second phase, and we do all this with one click of a button. One injection does this whole thing. This isn't 4 injections. This is 1 injection with 4 different phases to it. So then the second phase is in blue. That means it's going to switch over to saline. Then flow rate of 5, volume of 20. Then we go back to contrast, different flow rate, different volume. Then 4th phase, back to saline, different phase, or different flow rate, different volume. All right. Now, so that is a multi-phase injection. Like I said, there's one model that calls these levels, but they're called phases. So what happens is, now this is a 4-phase injection, but still just 1 injection. So the operator is going to, so we're all set up here. We have the volume, we have my protocol set up in there. Before I can actually do the injection, I have to do something called arming the injector. All right. Now, arming the injector basically locks it out. Says, all right, we're ready to shoot when I hit the button. We're going to be injecting, and nobody can change any protocols once we've gotten to that point. So on this particular model, we hit the arm button right down here, and then there's also an arm button over here. Now, there's on this particular model, it's kind of unique to this. There's something called protocol lock. You'll notice this button right here, the check mark on it, and it says has a little lock symbol underneath it. That's your protocol lock. If I hit arm, it flashes, just reminding the operator you haven't locked out the protocol yet. We can do that either at the head, or we can do it here when I hit over here. This particular button down here, we're getting specific on this one. This isn't general information. And the power button is on the left-hand side. Show you guys that.
At least it's got a pretty fast boot on it.
Yeah, it's the nice thing about this is whenever you turn it off, when you turn it back on, whatever you have on the screen, still there. All right, so I hit protocol lock. All right, so now we're locked out. Vacuum hose here, my little blue style split up. Again, that's a unique feature on the style bill. Do that. Now the next thing we're talking about is arming it. I hit arm, and the system is asking me. The system will ask the operator, check for air. All right, and the system does have all contrast injectors that they develop. They do have a system for detecting air, but nobody uses them. They almost never ever use them. There's a reason for it, but they do have air detection systems to prevent accidentally firing an empty syringe into a patient. So right here, it's asking, you wish to confirm you have a check for air, and I get yes, or you'll watch this button down here, it says arm, get yes. Oh, no, wrong button. Okay. You can also arm it, it doesn't flash. But down here, you can also arm it from there. So it's a button I hit here, I could have done it at the injector head with that button as well. Now, visually, the injector head is flashing, that's telling the operator, all right, ready to rock and roll, you hit that button, we're going. Now remember, this is a 4-phase injection, contrast and saline, contrast and saline, contrast, saline, contrast, saline, and we hit start. Start the injection. First phase, second phase, third phase. Final phase. All right, that is a multi-level injection. Some of these injectors is typically a minimum of 4 phases. Some of them can go up to 8 phases. Most injections are multi-phase injections for CT and MRI. Most injections are multi-phase injections. They don't necessarily do 4 or 8, but there's typically going to be 2 or 3 phases on most of your injections. All right. All right.
Is there anything that we should be aware of that screen when it's completed?
Oh, yeah, this particular one, they don't all do this, but this particular one will pop up a screen. It'll give you the total flow rate or the total volume injected for each fluid, the maximum pressure achieved in the syringes during the injection, whether you hit your pressure limit or not. It'll tell you if you did not get to the maximum or the required flow rate that you asked for. Yeah.
Does any of that information get stored like in a DICOM file or anything that goes to the patient image data?
Yeah, flow rate, volume, there's actually DICOM headers for the specific contrast. Yeah. Yeah, they can go, there's a lot of parts of DICOM that can be information. How often they actually do it, because the only way you'd be able to add it to DICOM is if the system's interface with the actual MRI or actual CT system.
Yeah.
They do that, but not always.
Yeah,
there's a lot of examples, a lot of times they do, a lot of times sometimes they don't.
Typically, the signal line is all they have connected.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Now, a couple other things that, because this is normally like a 2-hour. I leave little things out, but this is normally like a 2-hour presentation. So here's a speed version of it. Now, there's other things that can be programmed into the phases. They don't all have to be injections. You can program a pause or a hold. No, they're not the same thing. A hold is, if I program a hold, let's say phase 2, program a hold. A hold stops the injection, and it does not start the injection until the operator hits the button again. Right? That's a hold. Now, a pause is the same thing, but it's for a predetermined length of time. I'll hit enter in phase 2. Instead of hold, I'll enter a pause. And I'll say pause for 5 seconds. Then go. So a pause, the operator does not have to reinitialize the injector, right? A pause, it's a pause phase, counts down to 0, then it moves on to phase 3 without the operator. All right, so that's the subtle difference between a hold and a pause. Next. Delays. Now there's 2 kinds of delays, but they go by 3 different names, right? It'll make sense. Now, there is a scan delay and an X-ray delay, which are the same thing. And then there's inject delay, right? So let's start off with inject delay. It's the easiest, right? Inject delay is just that. Because remember, when we're doing the injection with the contrast injector, we're also firing X-rays into the patient. So I have to hit the X-ray exposure switch, and I have to hit the injector start switch, right? Let's just leave that aside for right now and just know that both of these things are happening at the same time, right? Sometimes I don't want the injector, and sometimes I don't want it to start at the same time. I don't want both the imaging system and the injector to start firing fluid and X-rays at the same time. Sometimes I want one to start, then the other one follows, right? So for an inject delay, it's exactly what that is. I'm going to program in an inject delay, a 5-second inject delay, meaning once the X-ray system starts shooting, let's say it's a 5-second delay, 5 seconds later, the injector starts injecting the fluid, all right? Simple enough. CT, MRI, angio, they all call it that, injection delay. Okay? Now the opposite of that goes by 2 different names, scan delay and X-ray delay. Now scan delay, let's talk about that. That's for CT scanners and MRI scanners, right? It's the exact opposite. I want the injector to start injecting, and so many seconds later, I want the imaging system to start doing its thing, whether it's CT or MRI, right? They don't use scan delay very much. It's not an often. It's typically the opposite. Typically, they get the patient rolling, then they start injecting fluid in the region of the patient. Right? Now, the other name, X-ray delay, that's for the angio injectors, cath lab, special procedures. Because scan delay, no, I'm going to click on that. Scan delay for CT scanners, MRI scanners, whereas X-ray delay is for the X-ray systems that aren't CT. So it's the same exact concept, but it's called X-ray. Yeah, questions, sorry.
Yeah, how are the syringes filled?
How that happens, to be honest, it's been a while since I've done lecture, I don't remember if I go in a few minutes, so if this comes up on the screen in a few minutes, I just forgot. So this is, when they get the syringes, and they come in sterile packs, and the syringe will come with the two things in my hand. It'll come with a fill tube. Now this is the J tube. They also have what are spikes, which is basically like just that. Doesn't have a J to it. That's if they want to fill the syringe with the ejector head pointing. They want to fill the ejector head pointing up. They use J tubes. So the J tube goes in here, and they have their bottle of contrast. They literally just hold it in the bottle of contrast. And using this particular model, they'll just use these buttons to drive the piston all the way up, fill the syringe to the volume necessary, and then pop over to the next one, do the same thing. Then once the syringe is filled with the amount of contrast that you want, then they have their connector tubing. Connector tubing, obviously, just like that. And then this end goes to a little T-box or directly to the IV. It goes in the patient. But that's what they do.
Is there a prime function on that?
There is, yes, this particular one does. There's this one, this DT injector, this is the stone. This is the Cadillac of contrast injectors, especially CT injectors. This one has all the bells and whistles and features that any CT injector might have. This one has autofill. This is the only one that does it. But this one, I have my protocol, my 4-phase protocol set up on the display. The injector knows the total volume I'm asking for, and the total saline volume I'm asking for. So when I hit a few buttons, do the autofill function, automatically fill the syringe with however much contrast I request. And also, so let's say it's 50, let's say it's 60 and 50, 60 saline, 50 contrast. So I fill both syringes up with just that exact amount, right? I got 50 my contrast, I got 60 my saline. Now I've connected my connector tubing, all right? So now what's my problem? I got to prime this system. Others, yeah, there's another one that most of them don't, but this system actually intentionally overfills both syringes because it knows the first thing you're going to do once you get there is you're going to prime this. So this one, and then it does auto priming. Once it's filled, you connect the tubings, you hit prime button, it automatically shoves the fluid out in the right amounts to get all the air out. Yeah, this one does.
Some of it's like a single tube going to the patient, but it's got to be dual if you're
right. Yeah. Here's
so it's a dual.
So this goes,
you're running both to the end of that.
Yeah, and that's always the case. There's never a separate tube for each one. They always come together close to the contrast syringe typically to deliver out the single tube. All right. Any other questions? Good questions. All right. CTMR into KDO. Now, what this is, not every angio injectors, I'm sorry, CT injectors don't. Which is it? Yeah, angio injectors don't do KDO. That was the first one I picked. Now, not all CT injectors do this, but there is a function that a lot of them have, and it's called KVO. KVO stands for keep vein open. Because there can sometimes be a long pause between, I don't mean pause like 5 or 10 seconds, like minutes go by between actual contrast injections. And the tip of the IV needle can actually form a blood clot at the tip, okay? So to keep that from happening, they can turn on the KVO feature. What the KVO feature does is, and different models do it a different way. Some do it like a constant 0.1 milliliter per second trickle. Some like the stone here, you can pick every 20, 30, 40 seconds or so to inject a half milliliter of contrast. Just every 30 seconds, I'm just going to deliver a half milliliter contrast just to keep tip the IV needle open. Okay, that's KVO. It delivers a small drop of saline. It's almost always saline. Some injectors, they can program to do it with contrast, but contrast is a very, very expensive fluid, where saline is just salt water, basically. So whenever possible, they'll do the KVO function with saline syringe. But some injectors do give them the option to use the contrast fluid. The capable pump delivers drop of saline at programmable time intervals to the patient keep the IV tip from clotting close and mild.
What is the reason that they don't have that on the angio? Is it because the heart's already in a distress state?
This is because it goes through an actual catheter.
Yeah, it actually goes through the actual catheter. The catheter's gonna be snaked up into the heart or something like that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sitting, sleeping.
Thanks.
And that's the one that gets the most work, right?
All right, now, attempt inject. So before I talk about a hold and a pause, obviously you cannot program a hold or a pause in the first phase, right? There's no point, right? Now, a test injection is just that. The test injection is to make sure, and this is only for CT and MRI. They don't do this with angio because angio, there's no such thing as an extravasation event. Extravasation is I stuck the needle in the patient's arm and I missed the vein, right? I mean soft tissue. Now I'm going to start shooting that fluid into the patient's arm instead of the vein. That's an extravasation incident. So test injections are a guard against extravasation. So they got the patient in, we got the patient hooked up, we got the IV needle in his arm. Before we go firing 150 milliliters of fluid into their arm, let's make sure we hit our target. What they'll do is, so this is just the first phase. There's no point in doing a test injection on the second phase. Right? First phase is going to be a very low flow rate, like 1 milliliter per second, be a very low volume, like 5 milliliters. Okay, so they'll start that. So as soon as they hit the start switch, which is the yellow button here, or on the head, first phase, we're going to do a test injection. They'll just shoot that one phase, right? Even if there's a multi-phase shot after it. Test injection completes, and there's an automatic hold after the test injection. Matter of fact, test inject. There we go. For those of you who can see it. Now the first phase was automatically blue, so it's set up to use saline as the test injection. And then there's a flow rate of 1. A flow rate of 1 and a volume of 20. That's excessive for a test injection, but for the example. So you notice there's that first phase, and then right underneath that first phase, there's that white line underneath it. That's indicating a hold. So we'll do the test injection over here.
So the test injection counts as one of your 4 phases you do on that model?
Yes. Yep. All right, restarts. All right, so my first phase is going to be a test injection. Yes, ready to roll. We're going to inject. So this is just our test injection. You see the blue side is lit up. That's the saline side. As soon as this injection is over, now it's waiting. Now the operator's like, all right, we're good. They check the patient's arm and bubble let it go because they do this at the patient's bedside. Test injection passed, and now they'll walk back to the exam room and finish there. All right. Any questions? All right. Next. Yeah, these are on this particular model, the enable button. Pretty much all contrast injectors have this. Again, there's one model that's the total opposite of this. They don't want the operator to be able to, especially if we're hooked up with the patient, they don't want the operator to like grab the injector head, like tilt it or something, and hit one of the forward or reverse buttons. That's what these strips right here are. And then all of a sudden now we're moving the syringe on the patient. So before you can use the forward reverse buttons, there's a button right here that's called the enable button. Pretty much all contrast injectors have this enable button. It's just a safety feature that means I can't move these pistons electronically with the flow bars without hitting the enable button first. There is another model out there. It's called the antimatter aluminum, very common contrast injector. That one does not have an enable button right here. The forward reverse button is a bar that sticks out like a whole inch out the front. You just push up on it and it's firing at full speed. You push it down on it, it's reversing at full speed. I mean, you literally just empty a syringe in a few seconds and you just grab it. No enable, no safety feature about that. It's a popular injector. There's tens of thousands of them out there. Yeah, antimatter aluminum. It's a great injector, but they're like, nah, screw that. I have no idea why, because there are other models have them. I mean, it's not like people force and said, you had that? No, all of them. The forward reverse load buttons, we talked about that. Every injector has some way to move the pistons forward. Almost every single model has a button to move the pistons forward or reverse in some way. The one that doesn't, remember I was talking about those models earlier, and I said the A6 guy, I said I hate that one. That's one of the reasons I hate that injector. That injector, the operators love it because what they do is they come in, they hook an IV bag of contrast, they hook an IV bag of saline on it, hook all the tubes up, and then they're basically good for the better part of the day. They don't have to refill the syringes between patients. When the injector gets low, the system senses there's not enough fluid in the syringe, so it automatically fills itself back up. The operators don't have to deal with that. They love it. But one of the things that assist head, the injector head, one of the things the assist head does not have is it does not have manual knobs, and it does not have a forward reverse load button. There is no way. It is not possible. If I want to just move that piston forward or reverse a little bit, too bad. Shut me down, start me over. That's the only way to do it. That takes about 5 minutes.
So there's no even software way on the screen.
No, no. I mean, you can tell it. Well, I mean, there is, but it's end case, which makes it empty the syringe and shut down. You can tell it to at any time. You can tell it, go ahead and fill the syringe. You know, you don't need to go ahead and fill it up all the way right now. So you can do that.
Yeah.
Nope. Yeah. The operators love it, and it's not hard maintenance. It's just from our Biomedical perspective, it's kind of a pain. Really. So the forward reverse load buttons, and typically most of them, they're slow, and as you move out, it goes fast, and you go from 1 to 10 millimeters per second, something like that, depending on the model. And then the manual knobs are just that. If I just manually want to move the plunger forward a few millimeters, forward or reverse, either way. Cool. Next. The arm indicator light. You guys all saw that. The arm indicator light is, and this is universal for arm. That is the visual indicator to the operator that we are ready to go when you hit the start switch or the start button. We're going to start injecting. Every contrast injector has some visual, and most of them have also some auditory alarm or sound maybe that lets the operator know we're on. Okay. Next.